Good evening and welcome to a special meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. It's special because it's Wednesday, August 8th. We usually have our meetings on the first Tuesday, but we had a ceremony last night for National Night Out that I'll talk about a little bit later. Anyway, welcome. It is 6 p.m. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to invite you to stand and join us in an invocation tonight led by Pastor Ron Lawler with Family Bible Church, and I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance immediately following.
If you would like to pray with me. Father, we thank you again, as always, for the privilege of living in this beautiful town. Thank you for all these folks who are willing to serve and to lead our community. We ask you to grant them wisdom and patience and discernment as they make the decisions. Thank you for the support of the citizens. And may your grace rest upon our city and our people. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Ron. Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so I think we have a couple of missing counselors tonight. Councilmember Wassinger. Who else are we missing? Councilmember Servadius, yes. Mayor Pro Tem?
I move that we excuse Councilman Erica Wassinger and Joel Servadius.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the absence of Councilor Wassinger and Councilor Servadius. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We will move on to the approval of the agenda. Anybody? Okay. Seeing no changes there, it will be approved as presented, and we will move forward for our citizen comment period. Citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda. To ensure comments are properly recorded, please state your name clearly into the microphone. Please also limit your comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. So we're open for public comment this time. Yes, Mr. Larry Mason is approaching the podium.
My name is Larry Mason, and I'm with the Oak Harbor Music Festival. I'm a director on all volunteer and nonprofit organization, and I want to officially invite all the council members to our free festival that we're having in Oak Harbor on August 31st, September 1st, and September 2nd. I have some goodies I'm going to pass out to you guys later. And I also would like to officially invite the mayor to come to our opening ceremony, which is on August 31st at 6 p.m. at the Island Thrift Stage on Southeast Jensen. Maybe you could help us out in the opening ceremonies. As we've always done in the past, we've always invited the mayor, so I want to reach out to you and do that.
Thank you, Larry.
Really excited this year for the bands we have coming up, and backed by popular demand, the Beatniks are going to actually open the ceremony this year, so why don't we have the mayor even introduce the Beatniks or something? Would be a lot of fun. But we have bands that have headlined in the past are actually just playing the festival, like Too Slim and the Tail Draggers, and Leroy Bell and His Only Friends, and Cody Beebe and the Crooks, and Ben Union's going to be there. There's a band out of Bellingham called The Dip that's fantastic, and we have this band out of Ontario, which is a 2018 Juno Awards winning band from Canada. They're a country rock band. They're getting all kinds of airplay. They're playing all over, especially Canada, but starting to get in the United States now. It's called the James Barker Band, and they're going to be headlining our event this year. We're excited as heck about that, and really want to thank the city of Oak Harbor for everything they do to support the event. Public Works, the fire department, the police department. It's been incredible what everybody has done to help us out. So we thank you very much. And I also have the annual report I'd like to pass out to you guys so you can see, which shows kind of where our funding comes from. This is from last year, but our president, Cynthia Mason, put this together, and it kind of shows everything that happens and how this nonprofit organization can actually thrive and do a project like this for free for the city, well, for Whidbey Island and Island County. And last thing is we give out scholarships, we award scholarships, and we're really proud. We've already in 2018 given out $10,000 in scholarships this year to graduating students in Island County, to actually 4 students. So, anyway.
Wow. Great. Thank you, Larry. We look forward to that. The event gets bigger and better every year. Anyone else for public comment? Heard? Okay.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ferd Johns, and I'm a resident of the county, and I'm with the Oak Harbor Main Street Association. And I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about the affordable housing proposal that Lehigh has made. The issue for me is not downtown merchants versus affordable housing. The issue is where and what kind of affordable housing is going to be best for all the citizens of Oak Harbor, the merchants, the shoppers, the less fortunate, and the homeless. The Lehigh proposal is on a prime water view site in Old Town, and the Main Street Association has been charged with re-energizing Old Town and has expressed concerns. I want to thank you all for actually listening to those concerns instead of dismissing them as some others have done. The project has been represented by county advocates in Lehigh as local working family affordable housing, plus a few veterans. Well, I think this may be a bit disingenuous. There are 6 two-bedroom units. That's possibly affordable family housing. There are 18 one-bedroom units, 18 studio units, and 9 single-room occupancy units. That may be family housing in some parts of the world, but I don't think so here. So, in my notes that I handed out, there are some excerpts from the Oak Harbor Comprehensive Plan, the zoning ordinance, and the design guidelines. And you can if you take a look at those, the stuff in red will show you that it's going to take a lot more exceptions than a parking variance to have this project happen on that site. I doubt you would ever give a permit or a variance to any other developer who proposed a building for Old Town that was so far from our aspirations, our codes, and our design guidelines. I assume you want to support the efforts of the Main Street Association to preserve and enhance the character and the economic vitality of the historic downtown. Can this building, as it's proposed, be successfully integrated into their aspirations for the fabric of Old Town, or will it be yet another major setback? Do the positives for one group of deserving citizens outweigh the potential harm done another group of equally deserving citizens, or is a win-win solution possible? You hear downtown's trashed anyway. Nobody goes there anymore, so who cares? A lot of us do care. So I reviewed the merits and the shortcomings of this project, looking at it as a major addition to Old Town. Lehigh claims it's like the longhouses which used to be in Oak Harbor. I practiced and taught architecture for over 3 decades, and I thought I'd either used or heard every conceivable rationalization for designing a totally out of context building, but I got to tell you, they beat me on this one. First, Lehigh played the veterans card in Whidbey Island's premier naval community. That's what the sign out in front of this building says. And then they seem to assume we're too stupid to recognize this thing isn't anything at all like a longhouse. Councilman Almberg asked me once if I thought a purely residential building in Old Town could respect the intentions of our local ordinances and guidelines, which were designed and enacted by elected representatives as citizens of Oak Harbor to preserve the architectural character and scale of Old Town. I said yes, but these Seattle people obviously didn't even try. So I ask you please just take a look at those pictures. Page 1. Lehigh proposal compared to what the building looks like to me and what Lehigh would like to tell us we're looking at. Page 2 is the Lehigh plan on the site. It's a very, very big building with a very, very long corridor. Nothing even close to it in this town, anywhere that I know of. Maybe, yeah, maybe.
No, I'm talking about time.
Oh, time's
Yeah,
up?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
okay. Okay, thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. And we have a few items, looks like, A through H. Any, yes, Councilor Munns? Right, excuse me.
Is there
Mayor-
someone here tonight that can talk about E? Maybe give a little bit more than the description that was in our packet?
Well,
I would
there's,
like to
well,
pull that.
there certainly might be, so we'll pull E. Any other items? Okay, we will consider that the other items A through D and FGH will be approved as presented. And it looks like Mary Campbell's here from the Snow Isle Library. Mary?
Thank you. I didn't bring a presentation, but I can give you a little more information or answer any questions that you might have. What we propose is something that's been done in many communities, and it's an opportunity for children to read a published book as they walk along a trail. And you use the actual book, so there's no copyright issues. What you do is actually take the book apart and put the pages along the trail in order. The Friends of the Library would purchase the books that we would use. We'd laminate the pages and create a story walk based on an actual book. I do have a list of some of the titles that our children's librarian has selected as possibilities to start with. If I can pass that. You'll see from the list that we're focusing on stories that appeal to younger children, anywhere from birth up to about 8 years old, the early literacy crowd. And our goal is to increase literacy, joy of reading, and help them be ready for kindergarten, all of the things that we do with early literacy at the library always. And in addition to that, to promote opportunities for outdoor activities and to focus on environmental education, if you will, for that very young group of people. So we've chosen titles that focus on outdoor activities, nature, changing of the seasons, but there are also stories that appeal to young children. So the idea would be the parent or the teacher would walk along the trail, read the page, they can talk about it, look at the picture, go on to the next page, just like they would if they're reading a picture book, but they're also outdoors and enjoying the park. I presented the idea to the Parks Board, and they were very positive about it. The Parks Department would maintain the signposts that we would put up, and they would actually do the installation of the signposts. There'd be 20 signposts that are fairly low to the ground, so they're like interpretive signs where you can open them up and put in a new laminated page whenever you change out the title. And we anticipate there'd be 20 signs, and we'd be providing opportunities for individuals or organizations or businesses to sponsor a sign. So it'd be 20 different opportunities for sponsorships. I've already had 3 people come forward and say they'd like to get their checkbook out. I said, not yet.
Okay, yes. Mayor.
It's a fantastic idea. I used to teach 4-year-olds for many years, so you can never read too much to a child. It opens a whole new world in their imagination. What I'm worried about is 20 signposts in our park, and if things become too cluttered. So I'm just worried about the placement of how it's going to fit with other things, but yet keep our open space. So
Right.
I'm not, the idea is fabulous. I'm just a little nervous about the placement and,
Yeah, I think that's really important, because you need to.
you don't want the dogs to get tangled and pull up the post, and,
Right.
you know, kids need space to run around and flap their arms, and, but yet it's a great idea, and the lending libraries that are around, you'll see them in people's yards or at the vet office or down in the park. There's been one, so they're all over. It's very important.
Like the little free library.
But I was just a little nervous about
Yeah.
the placement, and I guess it hasn't sight. So I just wanted that point to be made and on record. But
And I think that's a really good point, because, I mean, as I say, a lot of communities have done this, and there's some great recommendations of how close the signs should be. You know, these are little legs, you want them to be able to see the next sign, but also you want them to walk. So it'd be about a quarter of a mile altogether. The Parks Board was looking at some trails that are in kind of the what they call the dunes area. And I think, you know, nobody knows exactly what the park is going to look like yet. But Hank Needham had some ideas of where he thought this would work. And, you know, it would be probably along one of the lesser used trails. And you'd need to have a bit of space around the signs, because, you know, you could have a group of kids coming and you don't want it to be too crowded either. You want people to be able to get through with
Right.
strollers and things. So I think they're pretty cognizant of that. And what they decided was that they were not going to determine yet exactly where it would go, but they felt like there were at least 2 or 3 opportunities that would fit.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a great project. I just a
Thank you.
little nervous about placement. That's all. Thank you very
Sure.
much. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Allenbrough.
You know, I too am a supporter of education and the library. That goes without saying. There is one thing that we have a tendency of doing is that, and I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular, but we have some of these good ideas without having, how much is it going to cost? When you talk with the Parks Department, was there any discussion about how much this, whatever the quantity of posts are gonna be, the signs, the maintenance, the pads, if they're gonna be pads or columns? What does that reflect to in terms of cost?
Right. Well, the total cost for the signs would be around $5,000, but that does not include the installation. So I'd have to go back to Hank for those numbers.
And this is not to pick on Hank or anything like that. The Parks Department is not the legislative body of this community that commits to
Right.
the cost and expenses. And so that should come back to this council that says, this is what we're looking at, because we're in the budget process also. Is it gonna be 50,000, or is it gonna be 100,000? Is it gonna be 10,000? Who knows? That's what, for me, that's what I wanna see before I say, yeah, let's go.
And I think, you know, they're seeing it as we put in these trails, it's an opportunity for it to happen as part of that program. But there would be additional costs for installing
And
posts,
So
absolutely.
what do we do in this situation? It's in a consent agenda. Is this a consent agenda to go forward with this and commit to the cost? Or are we coming back to the council that says, this is how much it's gonna cost and this is where it's gonna be paid for?
Any answer to that question, Kathy?
I don't know what the cost
Well,
would be, I'd have to go back to Hank. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. It's our understanding that the library would solicit donations for the actual purchase of the stations along the path. And it would be the staff time to install them that the city would be contributing. And I don't have that estimated time to put a dollar figure to that, but Hank thinks that they can accommodate that in their work plan for next year.
Then are there gonna be pads supporting this where people are gonna stand around it on a concrete pad? Is it going to be? Yeah.
Yeah, they would be standing on the path, looking at the sheet.
Believe me, I don't wanna be the wet blanket here.
I understand.
It's a
I understand.
legitimate question. Pardon?
To be a wooden post.
I think Mr. Olmberg's question was, are we actually approving this tonight? And I'm not 100% sure I know that answer.
So what you would be approving would be the concept, and what I would suggest is that you, if you're interested, approve a motion authorizing this program without or with the funding for the actual stations to come from outside sources, with staff doing the installation. That would be my suggestion.
Councilor Heisen.
That's exactly what's proposed in the actual description of the agenda item, is consider accepting the Story Walk proposal, and then in the information it says that they would be paid for, each would be paid for within community funding for support, et cetera.
So how much is it gonna cost the city? Just tell me.
Well, it's a little premature because, like she said, she doesn't know exactly where they're going, exactly what, if the actual posts are being paid for, and it's just the installation. There's no way of being able to estimate that at this point. It's just a proposal that we're moving forward with today. That's my understanding.
If I were to estimate, it would take less than a day, maybe half a day of park staff to do the installation, and that's what the cost to the city would be.
Councilor Wiesner.
Ms. Rosen, it just appears as though these are simply fence posts that you're going to dig with a fence post hole digger and put in a quarter yard, half yard of concrete possibly.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I move that we consider accepting the Oak Harbor Library Story Walk proposal for Windjammer Park, with the costs being funded by the library, however they organize it, and staff time would help install it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, and I'll let you read that back. Can you do that, Carla?
Motion to consider accepting the Oak Harbor Library Story Walk proposal for Windjammer Park, with costs being funded by the library and installation performed
By
by
staff
city
time.
staff.
Any other questions or input? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our consent agenda. And we are on to mayor comments. I have a couple comments, actually. I was fortunate to attend with a few others from the dais up here, the National Night Out last night at our park, and I was blown away by Councilor Heisen's national anthem. It gets bigger and better every year. She did a great job, and got to see Mayor Pro Tem there, and maybe a few others were there. But it was a beautiful night for a good celebration. The people from several of our different departments in the city are involved in that. Certainly the police and fire departments, but always Public Works in a big way to help with things too. And it was a really nice evening. So thank you to all that work on that night, and we appreciate it. The new city administrator, Mr. Olborn, will be starting work next week. We anticipate that he will be here in the city on August 16th. And then I would like to ask Mr. Goltz to come to the podium for a project coordinator update.
Thank you. I've been addressing these three items up in front of you, dealing with the scope of what my services are to be. And these are the three items I focused this presentation on. If you turn to the next page. Goal 1, project schedule. The project schedule is a complicated subject. There are several of them out there. There are ones for subcontractors and ones for the various trades. So there's a number of different closeout schedules out there. I've looked at all of them, and I can say with conviction that the project is on target, and we have met or exceeded all project objectives and deliverables, and all outstanding items to date have been satisfactorily addressed. We made some changes. I met with Councilman Almberg and with the superintendent of the construction site. We've made some changes, and I'm not quite ready to go public with it. The reason is it dawned on me that we have left out an important component of people for input, and that is the staff of the solid waste facility. We didn't ask them until it dawned on me today, and I will be asking them in the next couple days, if they see any items that should be on this list so we can continue to track it. So that's where I currently am. I have given them already 15 items that I thought are included. Most of them were on the schedule. At that time, I didn't understand that they had 4 different schedules. I only looked at 2, and I didn't realize when I gave them the list. But they did incorporate some of those into the latest iteration. It's scheduled, the Primavera schedule number 45, which is the most recent. So that covers the closeout schedule. We have questions at the end. I'd be glad to answer. Goal 2, allowances and contingency. This deals with the cost. And I think there's clearly there's a culture of savings and economy apparent now. Currently, we've resulted in $100,000 in recent savings. They're being aggressively pursued by the owner, KBA, the project manager, Carollo, the engineers, and Hoffman Construction. All of us go through these and look at these numbers and have comments on them if we find anything that we question. And that continues. And now that I'm more familiar with the job, I can see that they have been quite judicious in the past, making sure that these prices are fairly arrived at. Reduction in costs included but not limited to changing the light standards, changing the material used for the automatic gate, changing the timing mechanism of the gate, finding a less expensive product put on top of the odor control structure, and reducing the depth of the topsoil in the park. This has been a team effort. I don't claim all these. These were done by a group of people, and bears their help that resulted in these savings that we're seeing. We continue to. We will be negotiating with KBA over their contract, which comes up, I believe, mid to late October. Oh, it's coming up for you guys next week. Okay. We're currently looking at those numbers, and that is proceeding. Goal number 3, communication. I've been around the block. I've been to a lot of projects. I've gone to a lot of project meetings. This project is the most discussed and coordinated project I've ever worked on. These guys, they have meetings for subcontractors. They have meetings for major contractors. The owner has meetings. There's meetings about closeout. There's meetings all the time. They're having meetings. And I think the communication is good. I sit in on those meetings. Some of them are a little esoteric, but I sit in on them just to make sure that these guys are communicating together. How can I do that until you do that? And I see that happening all the time. I'm very confident in their communication level. I've met with 30 stakeholders to ascertain any problems and learn historical backgrounds. I've met with many people from the city, from the design side of it, the general contractor. I've sat down in meetings. Are there ways we can save money that we haven't seen yet? Is the schedule working for you? Is the schedule indicative of the way the project is actually being carried out? And I've gone through it with all of the major players. I still have two that I missed. They've been on vacation, but I intend on talking to all of them and getting their input. Overall, I don't know why there's nothing there. Maybe I'll go back. Oh, there it is. We're getting fair cost. Reviews by the owner, engineers, and general contractor lead to fair cost pricing. I feel we're getting fair costs. I've looked at the proposed costs. I've looked at the genesis that started with the question being asked in the field that led to the costs. I haven't looked at all of them because there's literally hundreds and hundreds of them, but I've gone through with the ones that strike me as maybe being interested or something that might be debatable. And I have seen nothing to date that I would say needs correction. Overall, they're doing a good job on pricing. That will go on. I've sat in meetings when the issue comes up by the person leading the meeting that they'll question, they'll say, well, that's going to cost us additional money for that. And when they do that, I've noticed that everybody in the room turns around and looks at me. That's because they know what's Gary's reaction. Is Gary going to say, hell no, I'm not going to allow that to take place? On one instance, I actually tapped my table to get their attention and said, we are not going to pay that price. Then they turned around and looked at me and I grinned. I just joking this time, guys. But I've earned the reputation as the person who's watching the beans, the guy who's making sure that the prices are fair. That's what I've done my whole life. So overall, the project is tracking on schedule. The quality of the work is high. I go out in the field almost every day and take a look at a skilled craftsman on this job. Very good. You couldn't do much better, really. I see a few things from time to time, and I bring it up, but no, these guys are top-notch. So, next steps. One of the major things we have coming up, of course, is the occupancy, and the occupancy has the bearing of the permit issues on it. And the conversation has already been launched with the city building department, I should say. And communication is taking place regarding those items to make sure that we don't get down to the end and they say, we didn't do this right, or we don't like. They walk through on a fairly regular basis when we're called out for special inspection. They've done a good job of inspecting. One of the people I sat down and talked to is part of the earlier issues. Communication, I talked to the building official. And I said, how's it going? How's the contractor treating you? I'm getting good answers. I'm here to tell you people, I'm getting good answers. I like what I see so far. I've got a few things I'm still kind of hashing out, and I still have a few things that I'm not totally satisfied with. None of them are imminent. I want to do my research before I start casting stones or pointing fingers. But this is a good crew. You're going to have a good building, and by this time next summer, I expect to have my 2 grandkids down there at that splash park, especially on nights like this. So I will continue also to meet with the mayor. That's one of the other issues is communication, keeping him up to date on what's going on. So, questions?
Councilor Heisen.
Thank you for your feedback, Mr. Goltz. I appreciate hearing from a third party that we are on track, on schedule, on budget, on all the things. So that's always nice to hear. I didn't expect to hear anything different, but it's always nice to get that reinforcement. I do have a couple of questions. I am looking forward to seeing an actual closeout schedule once you're able to consolidate
Sure.
everybody's.
Absolutely, yep.
And there's a couple of statements that you made. You said after meeting with Councilmember Almberg and the superintendent of the project, which I'm assuming is Brian Shirley.
Yes.
You quote, made some changes.
He made some changes. We're basing it on his Primavera schedule
Okay.
because it's got all his activities and we're going to put all of our activities on it.
Okay.
The other schedules are so specific, there's a whole multi-page schedule that has strictly to do with testing and startup. That, I don't think is of particular interest to you guys, what days we have. I can assure you they'll all be taken care of, they will be done, but I didn't take that into consideration at this point in time. But no, I think it's working, the communication's good on it.
Okay. You didn't. You didn't elaborate on the changes because you specified that you need to talk to the staff that will actually be manning the. And then there was another statement about being in a meeting and people looking at you and you saying, like, quote, hell no, I'm not allowing that to take place or something like that.
Yeah.
So when I hear that we're making changes and or, you are unilaterally not going to allow something, that just kind of sets off a little bell in my head because it was my understanding that one or a couple of people wouldn't have the unilateral authority to be allowing or not allowing or making changes. Maybe the mayor can answer that question. Maybe it depends on the change.
Sure, I can. We had a meeting just last week, or was it Monday? I don't know. Time flies.
Yeah.
Anyway, Brett and Kathy Rosen and Gary Goltz and myself to discuss just exactly that. Mr. Goltz does not have any authority to make any changes. He certainly might communicate the possibility for a need for a change. Brett is the project lead, and there's no question about that. And it was discussed at our meeting, and should have been no question when the meeting was over about that.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. I mean, obviously there are some things like, well, we're going to get this other brand of toilet paper, which we don't need to micromanage. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page in terms of who could do what and when and how and why. I did also have a question about the changing of the light standards as an example of a cost savings. Light standards in the park. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, we looked at, or it was recommended to us by Corolla, our consultant. And chime in if I get it wrong, but there are two types of poles. One's an aluminum pole, one's a fiberglass pole. And we looked at it, we had Corolla's engineers look at it and decided we'd go with the fiberglass. It's a cheaper pole, and this is the guy who did the research.
When we were opening bids on GMP 13 way back when, we specified a pretty nice precast concrete pole, and some of the feedback we got at the time of bid from several contractors said they were very expensive. So we, as a value engineering opportunity, we looked at alternate poles. We found a fiberglass pole that has basically the same appearance for a lot less money. So it's about a savings of about $45,000. So.
Nice. So it's more aesthetic than the actual amount of light. I'm just thinking safety and how much. Okay.
In terms of safety and
okay.
functionality, we didn't even say more. The big issue with our light poles is seal landings. And so that's it drives a lot. We could actually save a lot more if we got just some cheaper heads, but they don't stand up to seagull abuse. So.
Yeah, seagull abuse. I like that. And Great, thank you. That answers all my questions, and I look forward to the October report and seeing the
Good.
closeout schedule proceed as once you get all the info. And there's a lot
Thank
of
you.
moving parts to this, so thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilman Omber.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Goltz, I have just a question for clarification. When
Sure.
you said that Brian Shirley, yourself, and me met and reviewed something on the schedule.
Right.
And then you said, in response to Ms. Heisen's question, he made changes on the he is not me.
No.
The he
Oh,
is
Brian.
Brian Shirley. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I just want to make that clear. I do not make changes on the
No,
schedule.
no.
Thank you.
Okay, yes,
Young
Councilor
man behind the
Wiesen.
curtain.
Mr. Goltz, I just want to make sure that I also understand something you said, that you're doing some archival digging back into previous GMPs. I know not all the
Yeah.
GMPs been closed
No,
down.
I mainly have been looking, yes, the short answer is yes, but I've been looking at all the process is quite a lot. That they have to provide documentation, everybody reviews it, that type of thing. I went back to some of the earlier ones as well, just to get a sense of, are we paying premium price, are we paying regular price, or are we getting a heck of a deal? And so I looked at the history. Mainly, I looked from this today hence, because I can't really influence, these are already in the contract, this is a done deal. But I looked at them just to get a general sense of it.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I do want to make a comment. I do appreciate the fact that you're going to be checking with staff before you get back to us with that information. I
I have
think
to
the staff is a
apologize.
very important
Yeah.
part of this. You know, I'd like to make sure that we're communicating, especially with park staff.
Yes.
You know, Hank's been with us a very long time, and we're getting heavily into the park deal, and I think his input is important. He's the one who's going to have to maintain what we do, so I certainly appreciate the fact.
They attend our meetings too. It's not that they're being left out in the cold by any means, but this thing kind of slipped through the cracks, through the cracks that I've created. I set the deal up and then didn't realize I hadn't checked with probably maybe the most important person, so.
Absolutely, good catch, and
Yeah.
I caught it.
Finally.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Councilor Larson.
Mr. Goltz, you sound very busy. And meetings, digging through the archives, site visits, taking a look, hitting at ground zero. I'm just curious, I'm just looking to find out, where are we with your original estimate of the amount of hours you were going to be spending on this project?
We're tracking right on. I come in, I found, initially I thought, because I live south of Coopville, I thought it'd be smarter to come up once for 8 hours at a time for the half-hour job, 2 days and a half. But it's moving so fast out there that I get the sense if I'm not there every day, so I'm working 4 hours a day.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Any
Thank
other
you,
questions?
Mr. Goltz.
Thank you.
So I have received a couple of questions about my statement a few months ago about an outside analysis and where I was at with that. I used the word analysis. The emails that came to me were, where are we at with the outside audit? It was never intended to be an actual audit. I'm going to read the answer that I sent to a couple of the citizens. Thanks for the question regarding an outside audit of the city's clean water treatment plant project. I contracted with an outside company, C2G International, when the cost estimate was last reported by the Whitby News-Times. Staff has forwarded the past documentation records to C2G at a cost in excess of $6,000. My spending limit for that contract is $30,000, so I have put the project analysis by C2G on hold at this time. As you may know, staff explained the cost increases on a robust economy where bids have increased since contractors have more work than time. As you may also know, I received council approval to hire an experienced project manager, Gary Goltz, who started about 5 weeks ago. Since hiring Goltz, I've concluded that staff's explanation will certainly be part or most of C2G's analysis findings. At this time, I'm not planning to spend more money with C2G until Goltz concludes his research. If Goltz finds areas of concern, I will have C2G research those particular areas. Also, staff informed myself and council this last Wednesday that another audit will be required before project completion. I hope to get more answers from this required project audit. And then ask if there were any other specific questions other than cost escalation. So that's where I'm at with the outside analysis. As I mentioned, we're on hold at this point, and don't know whether we'll be spending any more money on that. So a good report. Thank you, Mr. Goltz. And finally, I'll conclude my comments to say that I attended a second tribal reburial today, and I think it's probably the last. We had a reburial a few weeks ago in the park. This one was at their site up where our old project or our old city shop is located. The tribes are quite satisfied, I think, at this point, that the city, and especially the staff at the city, worked as hard as they did to make that all possible. So thank you very much to the staff, and it's nice to see that behind us, and I think the tribes are feeling the same way. We obviously have archaeological concerns in our park with the work that we're doing, and we have that pretty well covered, I think, with our staff going forward. So that concludes my comments, and we'll go to City Council at this point for comments. Anybody? Councilor Romberg? Mayor Pro Tem?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. National Night Out was terrific. You just can't imagine it growing as it has, but it was wonderful to see everyone out there, and the cooperation of up and down the island of different agencies, nonprofits, working together. It's wonderful that our town still believes in values like that. And so it was really, really good. Thank everyone for helping with Christmas in July. I don't have the final numbers, but I will get them. But it's a blessing too that people will think of others in need, and usually you don't think about food banks in the summer. You only think about it around Thanksgiving and Christmas. So thank you very much for everyone doing that. And it is nice seeing our police officers on foot or whatever around in the different parks at different times of day. I'll be going different places and helping out, and I think that assurance that they are there to provide service for everyone, no matter. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Councilman Alberg?
My questions will be related to Brett's presentation.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Councilor Heisen?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm making a note here so I won't forget something. Yes, National Night Out, unbelievable. It was insane, absolutely insane. And I was working a booth with the Youth Coalition, so I was there from about 1 o'clock to 8 something. And it seems to get bigger every year, and it does take an unbelievable amount of coordination. And so being there at the setup stage and at the teardown stage is, it gives me a different perspective of the amount of work and coordination that goes into it. You know, the police department is cleaning up and hauling all their stuff away off the upper fields, and we've got the canopies, and like, oh, these are labeled public works, these need to go here, and so they're all trying to get everything together. And there were a couple of vendors who had their wires crossed with being a vendor for, you had to apply to the Lions Club because they're the ones that coordinated all that, and so they showed up ready to go but didn't have a spot because they hadn't applied or missed something. And so we just found spots for them. The PD and the, God, I don't remember who was next to us, the Explorers. We all kind of scooted down a little so that we could squeeze somebody in, and it wasn't a big deal. We made it work, and I was so impressed with, God, the hundreds of volunteers and the enthusiasm of those volunteers. It was a very long, very warm afternoon, but the energy just didn't dampen at all. It was just wonderful to be a part of. So thank you for everybody that dealt with the parking and came out with that. That's something we might have to actually plan for some kind of expansion in the future. I'm not sure how, especially parking wise, how sustainable that is, because it does get bigger every year, and I hear it's one of the better ones in the region. It's pretty amazing. I was also thinking lately about, I realized that this meeting would be the first one that Joe Stowell wouldn't be at. And so I got to thinking about really valuable staff members like Joe Stowell and Nicole Tesh and Doug Merriman. And I just wanted, in case anybody is watching, I just wanted to thank them for their time and their energy and their expertise and their quality. I think that the city has really incredible employees and incredible leadership, and I want to know that your work is valued every day. So please know that, whether you're here or not. And then I had a question, probably for Kathy, about cameras in the park. I know that we established a policy, and I believe we purchased cameras. I heard from someone last week that the new Founders sculpture that went up had already been graffitied or something. Can you tell me about that and whether or not we have cameras up, or what? Did I hear that right?
This is the first I've heard about vandalism of the statue, but we don't and haven't had plans for cameras at that location. There will be in Windjammer when that's finished.
Not in the park, but around the structure.
There will be cameras around the wastewater treatment plant itself, but we don't have anything for that statue specifically.
Okay, yeah, I know they were in the parks, but I didn't know if they were there yet or where. Or
We do have some up, volunteer, and I want to say Flintstone.
Okay, but you didn't hear about the vandalism of the...
No,
okay.
I did not.
I'll get details on that. Thank you. That's all.
Councilor Larson.
I also got to participate in the National Night Out. Just as being there, I didn't do any work. I just had a great time. And I was walking around with a lot of other people who were also having a great time, but it did not go unnoticed. The number of volunteers and we had a big flag, we had a big fire, just lots of really cool stuff all night going on. It ties into one of the things I wanted to mention. One of the things that was recognized by one of our citizens who took the podium tonight was that we listen. And, we see that. And in the small ways, it doesn't get noticed a lot. But we read a lot of things that come our way in the mayor's response to questions that have been asked, the tough questions. And so there was one small thing at Fort Nugent Park yesterday that probably not a lot of people noticed. And a while ago, and like I said, it's so minute, but it's just one of those things I find cool about this job, is that citizens came up to me not too long ago and said, we don't have any bike racks at Fort Nugent Park. And people, kids in particular, they're riding to the park. It's a well-utilized park, and they're just throwing their bikes everywhere. Or they're tying or locking them up along where the egress is, for people to walk down that path. And I just contacted Hank at Public Works and said, hey, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not directing. I'm just asking a question. And he's like, and there's a bike rack there now. There's a big bike rack. And since I've been back from vacation, it's always full of bikes. And it was just, somebody made a call. We asked a question. And our city staff says, well, that makes sense. We're going to get on it. And they're looking at ordering some new ones. So it's just really awesome to be part of our community that was out there last night in the big ways, but also in the little tiny things. And I just want to say, we really do listen. If you've got something to say, good, bad, or otherwise, let us know, and maybe we can do something about it.
It's a great example.
Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. We'll go to our next item, which is under City Administrator. Clean.
My only comment is, we have Brett to present the study.
Good evening. It's time for our Clean Water Facility project update. This monstrosity is actually our biosolids dryer. This is actually filling up a room. This was actually taken a couple weeks ago to show you the frame of that thing. But that's when we take the wastewater and it's processed and we make the biosolids out of it. So there's a big belt coming through that. So that was an interesting machine. This is some more pictures of it. This is, on the left is the head end where the solids go in and come out actually the same end. So that's that end there. And this is a picture I just took last week. It's actually a lot further along, so you can actually see it's got sides on and all that type of thing. So it's really pulling together. That big tank on the left is actually a condenser. So the hot, wet air that doesn't smell very well actually condenses out. So that's a big part of it. That tank was kind of large anyway. And here's something a little bit exciting I thought everybody would like to see. This is actually a scale model of our splash park. The splash park contractor is actually pulling together. So I hadn't seen this, but they actually did a coordination trip out with the subcontractors to figure out how they're going to put this thing together. You see all these guys, these are actually our subs in the job, and they look kind of dour because they just figured out that the membrane bioreactor is not quite as complicated as some other things that we've seen in life. So, so anyway, that's a scale model, but it's kind of cute. You know, it's got little plastic concrete logs and that type of thing. Recent activities, design-wise, design is of course closed. A big part of the work on the Corolla team is our SCADA software development. That is in place. We're starting to bring it up and run it. Most of the hardware is actually installed. The fiber loop network that runs this plant, which is pretty complicated, is on way. A lot of the issue is we take instrumentation from the field. There's like 4,000 of them. Run them into an I/O, then we confirm them. So they're in the process of making sure all those things talk properly. Then we can talk about the logic of them. That is an ongoing activity, and it's going to be real busy for the next month and a half. The operator training is ongoing. Most of the operator training now is on vendor training. They're scheduling about 2 to 3 pieces of equipment a week. Like this morning, they did the aeration mixers. So that's a fair amount of work going on. So we're bringing systems up, and the operators are participating in that and getting trained on the equipment as they do it. So it's hands-on. We have applied for our solids management plan with DOE, and that's in process. We are obtaining final building permits for the park project. With the recent addition of the pavilion and the West Kitchen, we have a permit package to get in. So that building is lagging a little bit, but we hope to catch it up. But we have the permit package going in. Hopefully, it's pretty similar to the other ones, so it should be a lot easier to approve. Construction-wise, a lot of ongoing equipment and testing startup. It's funny that, you know, like I say, we have all these systems that go. I've always expected the workload to drop down, but we're still maintaining about 100 workers on site. The actual workers in the clean water facility are starting to taper off, but we're bringing crews in. We're running 3 crews in Windjammer right now, so that decrease got picked up by the Windjammer people. We're finishing a lot of the architectural items like windows, doors, paneling, sheetrock. So the buildings are quickly becoming to a point where we can occupy them, and that part will be coming to a like I say, electrical installations going on from control, power. That's a complicated animal, but it's getting done. We have finished most of the PSE upgrades on Pioneer. There's still some minor stuff that has to happen on City Beach, and then we'll be doing some PSE setup in the park. And we're preparing for the Whidbey Bank move and demolition. So right now it's either the week of the 20th or the week of the 27th that we get out of that building. So as soon as we get occupancy in the administration building, we're moving out of there, and then we'll flatten it. Windjammer Park construction, most of the mass earth moving is on the way. Now they're doing a lot of shaping for roads, trails, parking areas. So that is a fairly busy part. We're still installing site utilities, water, sewers, electricity, that sort of thing. We're beginning the irrigation installation. Now we're at a grade where we can do that. What we call hardscape is the sidewalks, paving, paths, all that. That's underway. We're starting a big part of our pavilion along just along the clean water facility side, along the Beachview property. So that is going to be going on full blast. Actually, it was kind of interesting that our subcontractor, ICI, we had a Hoffman Structures crew that was doing all our work before, left the project about 2 months ago, and I was out there, and all of a sudden, but ICI picked them up and put them to work on our hardscape stuff. So we have a very good crew doing our concrete work. So I was real excited to see familiar faces doing that, because not are they very fast, but they do good work. Most of the hardscape will start around the facility where it's not always obvious. It'll start branching out, but getting the interiors paved and those type of things will be the major thrust for us, so we can occupy the building and put it in operation. We are implementing the West Kitchen and Pavilion, and that's moving along pretty fast. We have to catch up on submittals and get that into the schedule, but I think it's going to come in pretty close to the other structures. Project budget-wise, this is as of June 30th of this year. Our project budget still stands at $148,342 plus some. Right now, as of the 30th, we have spent $115,821,000 with $32,520,000 to go in the budget. This is for the clean water facility. Upcoming major, we are, as we talked about at the workshop, talking about bringing ERCI and KBA contract amendments. We are working with them. It's been a little slow because everybody's been so busy. Schedule-wise, this has been sort of the schedule, and we're still pretty much on where we should be. It's interesting that we've had this mass, and the detail on it is expanded. So one of those items there is, 10 pages of detailed schedule information on it. So this, I look at it and I kind of look, well, are we on schedule? I say, yeah, but how can I, it becomes hard to explain at this point, because we are going in doing about 20 things at the same time. Schedule highlights, we are working, this is July and we're to start August. We have pretty much brought up, as I said, the liquid process, mechanical, electrical are complete. And we have started our clean water testing. We are testing systems as we speak. The solids processing, as I showed you earlier, is moving along quite nicely. We're still looking at September, mid-September, to start treating sewage. I do want to warn you, it may slip a week because of right now we're having a hard time with steel. And so one of our suppliers is becoming the critical path for us, because we're getting hard deliveries, and that's driven largely by the tariff situation and the chaotic markets right now. So they are getting some harsh words about keeping on schedule. Like I say, but we're still well under what we need to do. Sewage and solids startup will be complete in November, we hope. We're continuing to work on the park pretty much May through December of this year. Hope to have the majority of it wrapped up by the first of the year, with the caveat that we will be coming back in the spring to do some weather-related park improvements. I think the big one that people will notice is City Beach. We can't rebuild City Beach until we take out the pump station in the existing, until we get that pump station off. And unfortunately, when we get that tore out, then we're not going to have the paving season be over, so we can't pave again until February or March. But other than that, I think we're in pretty good shape. And right now we are planning on giving Navy a lagoon in December 31st. Public information, you can reach us at our website at oakharborcleanwater.org. You can call our number at 914-7000. You can email us at treatmentplant@oakharbor.org. With the imminent demolishing of the Whitby Bank building, we have discontinued community drop-in hours as of last Monday. People do want to come in or get involved, they can certainly give us a call. We can set up an appointment. But with us going into the administration building, we're going to have limited public access to the site. So we can figure out something if somebody wants to come out and talk to us. But we just can't walk in the front door like you used to. Questions?
Councilor Ollenberg?
Thank you, Brett. I do have a question for you. And you kind of set up the stage about the steel and the problems we're having with the steel and the impacts of the tariff tariffs
Yeah.
are having regarding steel and aluminum. We have a clause in this federal contract for Buy America.
Right.
And isn't it correct, even though we have to buy domestic steel, the domestic market is really impacted by the foreign market also, in that cheaper steel that comes into the market for non-federally funded projects is cheaper, and the domestic mills have to compete at that lower price. Now, when the tariff comes in about 25% higher, so now your domestic or your foreign product is higher, so the domestic mills chase up to that number. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, right now, the market is seen, and we bid our, GMP, I think it was 11, had our steel, fabricated steel in that GMP. We bid that last summer. Right now, the prices we're seeing from month to month are very fluid, and I heard a couple of quotes from Hoffman and from some other subcontractors. They were hearing 30% markups and stuff. American steel, yeah, you say, well, it's tariff steel, but the American prices went up because they had less competition on it.
That's right.
And right now, there's a lot of demand, and like I say, we were happy to get that concrete crew coming out, because you can't find a concrete crew.
And it's my understanding also that on the steel,
Yeah.
that they only hold a steel price for maybe 30 days.
Yeah, it's like I
And
say,
if that.
it's 2 weeks now.
Yeah. Then the other part is that what our public probably doesn't see in that project, it looks like a big concrete
Yeah.
project. Most of the steel is already in the form of rebar in that, and there's hundreds of tons of steel, of rebar in that thing.
And we bought the rebar in 2015 prices, because we bid that price. While it was a self-perform work, the rebar construction we took quotes on it, so it was actually bid. And that price was carried from 7 all the way through all the GMPs. So the price that we used for 7 for the rebar was per ton the same prices we used for 8 and 10.
And so you're telling us that there were not escalators in those purchase orders?
No.
Correct. And I'm just glad that timing is everything.
Yeah.
And as much heat as this community, the council, everybody involved in this project has taken about this, the timing couldn't be better for funding and for product costs like steel and even concrete, for what's happening in the market since we committed to that project.
Yeah.
And you can say it's a stroke of luck, or you can just say it was making timely decisions on that thing. I have one more point that I wanted to bring up to you, is could you go back to your cost summary for a second? On professional services, and I've asked this question, professional design service, et cetera, we never get a real summary of the, like Carollo and the architect, their subcontracts and stuff. We never get a breakdown on that.
Yeah.
And I know I've talked to Gary about this and with you about what are the control measures for going from an RFQ to an RFP to extending the contract. We see the construction side of it pretty
Yeah.
easily in the GMPs, but we don't really get a review on the consultant side of their change orders that increases there. At some point, can you guys prepare that? When I say some point, maybe the next time you do a presentation, to let us know what was the original contract, what are the deliverables as we've got, because we're coming up close now to even do one with KBA and I think ERCI.
And I think we can talk about that. We've philosophically tried to keep our consultant contracts very tight to what we know. We don't say to the end of projects. That's why we have so many amendments. I think that's a good approach to it, and I think we should be able to provide some fiscal. I look at it from a project man. I look at it as percent of construction or percent of project, and we're right in where we expect to be. But I think how we handle that and how that amendment process went through, I think was our best approach to it. And how do we quantify that approach and explain it to people? Because it sounds like it's just an endless check, and the fact is we are trying to keep our scopes pretty tight.
So the answer to the question is, at the next presentation, you're going to have
I will work
a
with
summary
Patricia on
for us
that
on that side
get
of it,
that,
too.
and I'll try to get it by the 21st. I'm real busy right now. Very busy.
I know you are. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that on that detailed spreadsheet part of the cost thing, it does break down the different contractors. It lists their total contract price and how much has been spent.
Page 128.
So are you looking a little deeper?
Well, my question to Brett basically was to help us understand the process of going from an RFQ to an RFP to a change order approval.
Yeah.
And you know, there isn't a perfect set of plans out there. There isn't a perfect contractor. There isn't a perfect engineer. And I personally would like to have some assurances that a little more knowledge about what our process is. When we get to one of these issues, well, the engineer kind of made a mistake and either specifying the wrong type or size of wire. This is just a hypothetical. And then the contractor is on the job doing that, and then all of a sudden we have a mistake, and now it goes back. How are we covering those kinds of situations?
Yeah, and that's, I expect that conversation to occur, and that's something I have been thinking about and how we formalize that. From my experience, we have a very good record going on, but like I say, there's no perfect set of drawings. Are we dealing with good drawings or bad drawings? I would tend to say we're dealing with good drawings, but you know, changes do occur. Are they costing us more money? Not really, but again, it's a function of, if a change occurs, do we have to go back and do rework, or does it cost us more to do it this time, do it this way? And I'm feeling our systems with the GCCM process give us a lot more control over that, but how do we quantify that to your satisfaction, I think is an excellent question.
Okay, and then we're going through another audit coming up on this.
Right.
We've done, what, 2 before on this project? And then our final is typically called a true-up on this, because these are GMPs where you get to the end of the project, and that'll be our final.
Well, we have several audit requirements. I'll let Patricia help me. One is we're doing an annual audit, a double audit of the project specifically. So the auditor specifically looks at our project for procurement, cost controls, contractual, making sure we're following state laws, that. And we've done, like I say, we've done 2 of them, clean ones. We'll be doing another one this summer, and we'll probably do another one after. When we get done with the project, we had a double audit requirement where we had to come back and audit the project to federal and state standards. I'm not sure if that's still in place, because I heard some change in process for that.
So we've had 2 single audits. We used federal funds for 2 years, 15 and 16. They both were audited for single audit. This year, the auditors are working with DOE to determine if they use more state funds than federal funds. That's what we were told by DOE, but the auditors are verifying. If it's under $750,000, they won't have to do a single audit. But because there are so many transactions, I can guarantee you those there will be pulled. When they do a single audit, they don't just look at the numbers, they look at the programmatic requirements, they look at whether or not we're doing the processes correctly, so they sample all of those things. At the end of the treatment facility, there's a requirement to have a cost audit done. The state auditors, I reached out to them, and they would be able to do that. Their estimated cost to be around $10,000 for that, but because this is something that is unusual across the state, that they'll have to get back to us, but it is something that they can do as independent auditors.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, anyone else? Yes, Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you. Brett, I just have a comment. I really appreciate these monthly reports. We've come a long ways. For the public out there that, for their sake, I want them to understand we're getting updates now of changes, cost changes on each item, what is being charged out to. We're getting each month an overview. I noticed you've added in the cost for Mr. Goltz in here, so these are getting updated regularly, so we're able to see them, and I just want to commend you on, not only do I like all the pictures, obviously, in here, but the reality is the financial information. We've come a long ways, and we do appreciate your efforts on that. Thank you much.
Anyone else? Thank you, Brett. Thank you.
Councilor Heisen, did you want to, did you?
I don't think so.
Nope, okay. That concludes our clean water facility update, and we'll move to section number 6, public hearings and meetings. To speak at a scheduled public hearing or meeting, please sign in, or if you didn't, you'll still get a chance. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly in a microphone, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. So item number 6A is ordinance number 1839, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code Chapter 20.16, oak tree protection. And I see we have our senior planner, Kat Kamak. Welcome, Kat.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Kat Kamak, Senior Planner, here to present some amendments, text amendments to our Gary Oak protection standards. I have a short presentation. So these text amendments originally originated from a discussion related to oak trees and variances when the City Council was discussing the Rose Hill subdivision. If you remember that, there was a couple lots that were impacted by a current oak tree, and they couldn't find quite the space on their property to move the house to accommodate the tree. So we were looking at trying to change the variance language. The language at that time said you can move the house wherever on the property, but you couldn't get closer to the setback than 5 feet or 10 feet. We thought that limitation was not purposeful necessarily, so we went into the code to try and change it to give them the maximum flexibility to protect the oak tree and to be able to build a structure. So during that discussion, there was some public comments related to how oak trees are generally protected under our ordinance. So we went ahead with the variance language, but then we had a follow-up discussion with the Planning Commission and the City Council, trying to generate the amendments that's being proposed tonight. So what does the current code say? The current code says suitable protective measures, and what the council and the public thought was that this is very general. What does this do for us, and how have we as staff operated under this, is that when we deal with a situation on site, and if it is outside of our scope of knowledge, we usually will ask for the property owner to hire an arborist to help them with the construction challenges that may be there and develop a plan. This works well for new development. It's great to plan for it, but it's really challenging in existing structures that want to expand, redevelop, because these trees are really close to existing structures, and may be more challenging to have all these plans in place prior to doing any construction. So what the current process allows for is for the work to be kind of handled as you go, the challenges to be dealt with as you go, as discoveries are made, as you find routes that you're coming across, we deal with situations. This may work great for property owners, because sometimes you could do construction, never encounter an issue, and you can build what you want. But it doesn't give the best assurance for the community and the groups that are interested in protecting the oak tree that adequate measures were taken. So these amendments are trying to address that, just bring specific measures to try and deal with construction projects. And so staff looked at various code languages in other cities. The Gary Oak Society provided information, and we've come up, based on that research, some specific measures that we can include in our code, that if a property owner can follow those, then for the most part, they can move ahead with their construction project. Now, if they do have a situation where it's hard to address it with the codes that are being proposed, then we've added language to still evoke the need for an arborist, if needed, to help with the construction project. So that's the code amendments that are in front of you today. During this process, as with any text amendment, we have to go through a public input process. We heard from the Gary Oak Society on ivies being a nuisance to Gary Oak trees and hindering their health. And so they wanted some language added to that. So since we're in that section of the code and amending language, we threw in the ivy as a vine that's invasive to the Gary Oak environment. And during our SEPA review process, which sends this text amendments out to other agencies, there was a question on, are you protecting oak trees? Are you all oak trees, or is it just Gary Oak trees? And in order to be clear, we added the word Gary Oak in there because we're not trying to protect all oak trees. The link is there currently existing because the Gary Oak section protection, the Title 20 is under the critical area chapter, and there is a definition chapter underneath of that, and it clearly says oak tree means the Gary Oak trees, but we wanted to kind of include that language to just make it apparent. And so those are the code amendments that are in front of you today. Any code amendment that needs to be considered has a couple criteria they have to meet. One is that they're consistent with the comprehensive plan. Of course, these measures are to protect Gary Oaks. Gary Oaks is a namesake tree to Oak Harbor. It's in our comprehensive plan. It's in our vision. So protecting that Gary Oak is definitely inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. And it's also part of our critical area in Oak Harbor to protect these trees. And in protecting the trees, you're protecting a certain aspect of the environment. You're protecting the culture of Oak Harbor, and in that way, it's protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. So we recommend that the Planning Commission held a public hearing. They kind of hold hearings for most of the text amendments that come before City Council, and they made a recommendation to the City Council to approve the amendments. So what we suggest that the City Council do tonight is conduct a public hearing similar to the Planning Commission, get comments from the public, and then we recommend that you adopt the ordinance adopting the amendments. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Before we do that, I'll open that public hearing at this time and ask if there's anyone. Welcome, Laura.
Good evening, Mayor Severance, council members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Laura Reniger with the Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society. Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society has been advocating for a more robust Gary Oak tree protection code since 2016. Our group has made suggestions for practical ways to enhance and clarify the tree protection code, and City Planning Department staff have carefully crafted changes that we believe yield a greatly improved Gary Oak protection code. It is our hope that the improved code will provide clear direction for builders and homeowners during construction, as well as prevent needless Gary Oak tree deaths due to invasive English ivy. Thus, we enthusiastically support the new tree protection code and urge City Council to vote yes. Let's keep our unique and beautiful oak trees growing strong in Oak Harbor for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring CAC back up. Yes, Mr. Olmberg.
Minor item here. In, what page? Page 162 on this, it's item, under code item 2016-10, item 2D, says no roots greater than 4 inches in diameter shall be cut, even if such roots are inside the CRZ.
Outside.
Excuse me, outside. Is there a way that, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an arborist, okay? Is there a way that you can tell in a forest which 4-inch diameter roots belong to a Gary oak tree or just an oak tree or a maple tree? How do you separate that when you're excavating on a site and you run into a 4-inch root?
I wouldn't be able to tell you the answer to that. I'm hoping that with the help of our Parks Division, usually the Parks Division Manager, Hank Hyden, comes out to these sites to deal with solutions when we encounter Gary Oak related issues. And I'm hoping that he can help, or we can call on experts to, and that's why the arborist, evoking the arborist clause is in there, so that we can, if it gets to a point where we need to absolutely confirm somehow, we have ways to do that.
Well, we really made an effort in here to identify we're only concerned about Gary oak. Would it be appropriate to have no Gary oak roots greater than 4 inches shall not be cut under any circumstances, the way the language is here? So it's clear?
We can. This is under the Oak Tree Protection Code, so this applies only to Gary oaks. And so I would assume that we're not considering all 4-inch trees. This is this language is specific to oak trees under the title. So, but if you feel like that is something that needs to be added, that's fine. But our assumption is it's already implied because it's under that chapter.
I'm going to let it go. There's a lot of assumptions that goes into this, and when you go through this whole code, there's a lot of strikeouts about oak and inserted Gary oak. It's pretty specific.
Mm-hmm.
And so unless there's a scientific way to separate a maple root from a Gary oak root, you just let me know, would you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Councilor Larson.
So, Hack, this isn't the first time you've come before us to talk about these Gary oak trees. I just want to commend you for the specificity. We've had these conversations before, and a lot of input has been taken into consideration. The Planning Commission, the Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society, there's been public input, and I really feel and felt looking over this that everyone's concerns were taken into consideration. This preserves our heritage. It is in keeping with the comprehensive plan goals, and it also protects homeowners. I can't see where anybody loses with this legislation. And it is, again, it's specific, and where there's a question about that specificity, there's we can get an arborist to figure it out. So I don't have any other questions for you on this. I think you addressed everything that's been brought up by this council as I've been sitting here, homeowners, the Gary Oak Society. Are there any?
Councilor Wiesner.
I know where you're heading, Councilman Larson, but I just have one question before we make that motion. CAC, on item 2 under the beginning of the Gary Oak Tree Protection, it says during building construction that suitable protective measures listed below shall be erected around Gary Oak trees and shrubs. Is there a Gary Oak shrub?
Good question. I guess, if there are smaller varieties, we have, oak trees have a lot of, they drop their acorns, and they do have little, we've seen in many oak trees, little oak trees, starting to spring up around the existing oak trees. And I think we want to protect that critical root zone that includes not only the main tree, but any other supplemental oak trees that are around that.
Well, and I don't mean to get too persnickety, but as we go through the rest of the ordinance, nowhere else does it mention shrub any place. It continues to mention tree, and even when it gets down to topping, trimming, et cetera. It only mentions trees, so it would appear as though trimming a Gary oak shrub, if that's what we're gonna call it, would be acceptable. I'm just concerned, I mean, you know, we're very specific about this, Gary oak tree, and then we just come up with this generic word shrub, and we don't even have Gary oak in front of that shrub. So, I mean, I guess it's a technicality, but I'm just worried about how it could be construed. It says Gary oak trees and shrubs.
If anything, the language is more restrictive than being relaxed, but it is up to the council. If you think that doesn't warrant being there, you can take it out. Because I mean, these measures are above and beyond what's there in the current language. It is more protective or specifically protective.
And I'm
So
absolutely all for protecting, and I do appreciate the staff working with us on getting the option of the arborist in there. That was a concern we had, to have a prescriptive code and have no way around the prescriptive code in a particular instance. Could possibly we ask our Gary Oak person out here in the audience about this shrub thing? I just hate to pass an ordinance that has something in it that doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense.
So we don't usually refer to Quercus garryana, which is the species of oak, as a shrub. It's either a seedling, which means it's just a little sprout from the acorn, 1 to 2 years old, or maybe a little larger, a sapling, which is even larger still, and then a mature tree that can be, a couple decades and beyond, older. There are different, Gary oak trees grow in different places. They look more shrubby when they're on the cliffside. They're, stunted growth. Than when they grow in deep soil meadows like Smith Park. But usually we do not use the word shrub. It's a seedling, a sapling, or a tree.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my concern would be by using the proper word and having it in there versus just Gary oak trees in general, which I would think would cover saplings, et cetera, versus using the word shrubs. We'd probably have a little clearer ordinance.
absolutely, we can strike that out if you'd like. We have no issues with that at all.
Well, that's all I have, so Councilman Larson, you can do what you're gonna do there.
Any other input?
Yeah. Yes, Councilor Larson.
I move to adopt ordinance number 1839, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code, Chapter 20.16, to include specific protection measures for Gary oak trees in Oak Harbor while removing the word shrubs as delineated by Councilmember Wiesner.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion to adopt ordinance number 1839, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code, Chapter 20.16, to include specific protection measures for Gary oak trees in Oak Harbor, excluding, while removing the word shrubs.
No shrubs in our code.
We have a motion and a second. Motion by Councilor Larson, second by Councilor Olmberg. Any other, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, CAC. Nice job. And we'll go to item number 6B, ordinance number 1836, repealing and replacing Oak Harbor Municipal Code, Chapter 11.32, transportation concurrency. We have our senior planner, Mr. Lefebvre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Dennis,
Good
welcome.
evening, council members. Tonight's presentation is on what staff has been looking at to kind of reinvent our concurrency ordinance. This basically evolved from the transportation plan, which we worked on and adopted back in 2016. It was kind of an implementation tool for this plan. And what I'd like to do tonight is structure my discussion on basically doing a quick background, describe how we look at concurrency, what the proposed concurrency system will look like, and then discuss our next steps. As I'm sure you're aware, the Growth Management Act, which was passed in the early 1990s, identified a variety of goals. Goal 12 was one that addressed concurrency specifically, and I've highlighted in red the key points of that goal, and that's to ensure that public facilities and services are adequate to serve the development without decreasing a current service level. And that implies the transportation system, a park system, school system. Tonight's focus is on the transportation concurrency specifically. As part of the transportation plan update that we did with Fair and Peers, we identified 6 key goals. Obviously, the one that have highlighted is the one that we are actually implementing with this proposed transportation system, and that's the multimodal aspect. The existing system looks at a new development. It assesses the amount of trips that new development will place onto our transportation system based on the ITE manual, which is the Institute for Transportation Engineers manual. It's pretty much a Bible for this type of methodology. And then through potentially an engineering study and a traffic study, we assess the impacts on nearby intersections that this new development would impact. If it triggers the level of service below what is identified, which is typically our level of service D for our intersections, we also identify a level of service E for intersections along State Route 20. If it reduces or it creates a deficiency in the level of service, that development would be required to enhance or improve or provide the transportation improvements to raise that level of service back up. What we are looking at proposing with this new ordinance is to basically do away with that individualized look at a development's impact on the adjacent intersections, but rather look at it more from a holistic point of view, where we would look at our transportation projects that have been built or proposed through our capital improvements program. That would create basically a citywide capacity or system completeness. We would then assess new development on the demand that development would create in trips and subtract that from the entire whole system. So instead of looking at nearby intersections, we would look at the citywide system as a whole. Those capital improvement projects would be assessed by dollars. That would create the capacity in the entire system. The other caveat to this is we would ensure through the review process that development would provide safe access, whether it be through a driveway access or possibly if it's a large enough development, we would still have the ability to request larger infrastructure improvements, possibly signalization or some other type of widening of lane enhancements. As you know, and through the presentation that Kendra made back in April to the City Council at the workshop, the automobile level of service is pretty standard. It is based on an ITE manual, the number of trips versus the capacity of the roadway. We identified in our plan that the other modes of transportation, i.e. the transit, bicycle, and pedestrian modes of transportation, are less precise. So what we're looking at is actually providing some options to enhance the citywide systems for the non-vehicular aspect. And you can see by these charts here that the middle of the road is kind of a level of service C. If you want to get to a greater quality of service, you would provide some of those enhancements that are identified. You'll note in the ordinance that's called a level of service or a quality of service of yellow. That's kind of the methodology that we used in the transportation system, in the park in the transportation plan. The tool that we would utilize to incorporate this and enhance what we have already on, as a tool. It's a far simpler tool. We would start with identifying the projects that are proposed through the capital improvement program. For instance, this one is Northeast 7th Avenue. We do have that identified as a potential project that is to be funded. We received from our transportation plan a number of what's called here running start trips. That's what our existing system already has as far as capacity. We identify 667 as the capacity number. The trip capacity from our projects, which is Northeast 7th Avenue, would be 1,944, and then that's basically utilizing a dollar equivalency for the number of trips. The example that is used here is if there was a development, an apartment development, that would be plugged into the ITE manual, and 62 trips would be identified being created by this development. That 62 would be subtracted from the 667 and 1944 for the total remaining of 2549. That's just a simple example. And that is essentially the tool that we could be using in-house and would make things a lot simpler for us. As noted by Fair and Peers, we do have a pretty large capacity overall in our citywide transportation system. So even though we don't have a lot of projects in the pipeline, the ones that we could be looking at, even non-motorized projects, we could be looking at pathways, sidewalk connections, if they're in our priority network, that would add capacity to this system. Where we've been with this, we've had internal discussions for almost 2 years now since the adoption of the transportation plan. We have had discussions with the Planning Commission earlier this year. Kendra made a presentation before you at your April 25th workshop. At the May 22nd Planning Commission, they did issue a unanimous recommendation for approval to this body, and we bring forth the proposed revisions for you tonight. And with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any of your questions that you may have on this unique system.
Thank you, Dennis. First, before we do that, we'll look to the public for comments, see if we have anybody. Okay, seeing none, you can stay right there and we'll ask the council for input or questions or... Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Lefevre, just that one example about the dwelling, it was the apartments, and you had the trips. Because it is an apartment, you would think that there may be a lot more use for sidewalks or bikes out of there, just because there's probably only one car, there's probably 2 adults per apartment, sometimes more. So is that also figured? I mean, you were just showing the trips by cars, but I also noticed that if we're doing the multimodal, you know, you're thinking about bike packs and stuff, but to me, apartments mean more kids, they're on the sidewalks using them. Our district has limited, in some ways, the buses, so they've got to walk to school. So is that, I'm guessing that is also figured in there on what type of dwelling and where it's situated on size or capacity for accommodating the either trails or sidewalks or whatever.
That would be incorporated into that safe access element
Okay.
of the ordinance. I think the unique point that I'd like to make also is the reason why we're tying it up to a dollar amount is that it has the ability to incorporate the dollars that would be spent on enhancing a sidewalk facility or possibly placing a transit stop.
Okay,
Or bike facility, for that matter.
I missed that little catch. It didn't
I
quite-
may not have made that very clear.
Well, it could have just been my brain too, but thank you.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Councilor Humber.
I'm not quite trying to run through my mind on the formula on how you're going to charge a project for a trip. how do you address choke points that are created by AM, PM peak periods?
Well, I'll say the beauty of this system is that we wouldn't specifically address choke points through an individual development. It's designed so that the transportation plan is updated periodically every 6 to 8 years. That will do a full analysis as far as, where those, choke points seem to be growing. But it's unless there's a safe access issue, it wouldn't be up to the individual development to rectify that choke point if there's capacity in the entire system.
Under the current system, if a project degrades, let's say, an intersection for this example, that project has to bring that degraded intersection up to a level, I think in our code, to an LOSC before the project can be approved, correct?
That would be correct.
That's our threshold if they go up like to, I think, an F.
I think that's part of the problem as well, because if there was previous developments that may have paid their impact fee, may have been a number of years ago, if that fourth development or the ultimate development that triggers that deficiency in level of service, it's been our experience that that last development really pays a disproportionate share of that improvement.
Okay, now, I took you down the old path for that method. We changed that method where we have a pay and go now, where we pay a fee depending on the trips generated and not do the improvements on an intersection. That was the old way of doing it. There's something's not connecting here. I'm missing the message, because the old system used to be, if you degraded the intersection below the approved threshold, here comes Steve Powers.
Yeah,
and then we
my
went to
safety
our
net in
current
this
system,
situation.
which is, you have a fee based on generated trips by that project.
Right.
That goes into the pot. And now I don't understand how we're getting to doing this holistic approach and how we identify areas that have to be mitigated.
So, Mr. Allenberg, I think what you're doing is you're taking the previous system, which there's been only one, and you're thinking about the two prongs of that as if they were separate processes.
Yeah.
Our existing transportation concurrency process has essentially two prongs. So we do the traffic impact analysis, or it's performed by the developer. If the results of that indicate that they are not degrading any intersections below the adopted level of service, they will simply pay their transportation impact fee.
Right. About $560 a trip or something in that.
$589.
$589.
For
okay.
commercial and $907 for single-family residential. If, however, the results of that analysis shows that they are impacting an intersection or intersections and causing them to fail, they would be responsible for both pieces. They'd be responsible for bringing that intersection up to the adopted level of service, as well as paying the transportation impact fee for the trip generation.
Okay,
and
now-
that's our existing system today.
Right. Now, simplify what we're going to now on the holistic part. How does that fee structure, tell me how the fee structure works now when you have a project that's going to, let's say, put 50 cars into the cycle, and how are they going to pay?
We're not reviewing it based upon on intersections, individual intersections anymore. We're looking at the entire system. Are there trips available within the system?
Okay.
For use by these new developments?
Okay.
And then they will still pay their impact fees But what we're looking at is, are they affecting the system as a whole rather than this intersection, and this
Okay, so we
intersection?
still have the impact fees in there based on
Trip generation.
trip generation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Mr. Power, you always seem to come to the rescue on that, don't you?
It's always my rescue, too. I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else?
That's it for me.
Any other questions or input? How would the council like to proceed? Councilor Heisen.
I move to, excuse me, sorry. I move to adopt the recommended action as presented.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to adopt the recommended action as presented. Anyone need me to read that? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you, Council.
Dennis. And we will move on to the last item in number 6, and that is Resolution 18-17, 6-year Transportation Improvement Program, 2019 to 2024. And Senior Planner Kamak is back.
Good evening again. Here to present the 6-year TIP. The TIP is Transportation Improvement Program. This is done every year. We do it annually as a city. What it is basically, it is a way to coordinate and manage federal funds, usually grants. So the way this works is at the federal level, they pass a bill for transportation. There's dollars allocated to it. That comes to the states, different states, based on various criteria. And then the state tries to, of course, they use it for state projects, but there's a large percentage of those dollars that they want to get to local jurisdictions. And the way that they do that is through these regional transportation planning organizations. If you remember a few years ago, we were not IRTPO, we were the SIRTPO, which was the Skagit Island Regional Transportation Planning Organization. The reason for that, these metropolitan transportation planning organizations, the states require them to be of a certain size in order for you to kind of access these dollars, because they want these dollars that come from the federal agencies to be of a regional impact, as opposed to, you know, doing your house street in front of your subdivision. So the requirement was for these metropolitan organizations to have to be of a certain size by population. So Island County did not have the total population to have its own RTPO. We had to combine with a adjoining county in order to be able to access these funds, which is why the Skagit Island RTPO was formed, because they didn't have enough numbers as well, and we joined with them. And therefore, there were federal dollars that came from the state through the SIRTPO, Skagit Island RTPO, and projects were competing against each other. That's what they say. It has to be a competitive process in order for you to be able to access these federal grants. A few years ago, Skagit County, they're growing. They met the threshold of having their own RTPO because they exceeded a certain population. They withdrew from that agreement, and Island County was left by itself. If nothing changed, the way the state legislature works for those funds is that then Island County will be responsible for getting those dollars to the local community. However, Island County is just 3 commissioners. When you're doing an RTPO, you have membership. We have representation from every political body there. So Island County wanted to retain that structure as opposed to just having it be headed by Island County. So that's why the IRTPO was formed. The state changed the legislation specifically to allow for that to happen. And so a couple years ago, we formed the Island County Regional Transportation Planning Organization. So that's kind of like a nutshell of what IRTPO, but basically that's it's a regional transportation planning organization. They plan for regional projects. They have grant money, and we find a way as a city to try and tap into these federal dollars by being part of the RTPO. We have members, staff members in a technical advisory committee, and then we also have representation at the policy board from all the jurisdictions, Langley, Cookeville, Oak Harbor, Island County. The Port District's are also part of it, and also the Navy representative is there. So there are two basic funding sources within that. There's one is the STBG, which is the Surface Transportation Block Grant. That's usually a larger sum of money, and there are four, they call them federally classified streets, which are mainly arterial streets. Again, they want to have a regional impact, so you can't use this money to do a local street, but your arterial streets are considered federally classified, so you can use them for your arterial streets. And anytime you want to use that money, you have to come up with a local match. 13.5% is what the local match is in order to access that fund. Another source within that is the Transportation Alternative Programs, and that's what you do trails with. That's a smaller sum of money, and for that particular program, you don't need to have a match. The entire amount is a grant. So the IRTPO maintains a 4 to 6 year planning period, just like the city does with our capital improvements plan. We have a 6-year plan to plan for our projects. They have a 4 to 6 year plan, and they go through a competitive process to evaluate projects from around Island County. There's a big process that they follow through before it goes to the policy board, gets approved, and we have to submit this sheet into a system, computer system, and then eventually the state gets it from all the cities and the jurisdictions. They'll get it from IRTPO, they get it from the county, and they throw their projects in, and it's all kind of a coordinated effort to manage the federal funds. So that's what we're looking at today. So what are the projects that we have in this pool? We have the Northeast 7th Avenue. That's part of the, that's a project that's in this pool with other county and other city projects. We have the Heller Street Overlay, and we have the Waterfront Trail project. These are the three projects that are currently in the running for grant monies over the 4 to 6 year planning period. I'll go through some of these individual projects. So the Northeast 7th Avenue, of course, and these projects come from our transportation plan. So they are not something that staff makes up or anything. We look at our transportation plan, look at the need, and so these are all kind of an approved list of projects through that we consider when we put in for the grant application. And of course, for any grant application over a certain amount of dollars, we come to City Council and get your blessing before we go for that grant. So most of these have already gone through some kind of an approval process with the City Council. So it's a surface transportation block grant. The total project cost is $4.6 million. So we've applied as a city for the $4.6 million it's going to cost to do this project. Now, they don't have that much money in this grant pool, and there are other jurisdictions that are competing with it. But what they try and do is to try and break the project down and try to fund pieces of it as much as possible and spread the wealth around, so to speak. So when we applied as a city for the Northeast 7th Avenue, there wasn't sufficient funds to fund the full project, so broke it down, and they were able to fund some of the PE and the right-of-way acquisition portion of that project. In 2018, again this year, we applied for more dollars to do the PE, and we also applied for construction funds, but of course, this is a competitive process. We were not the top project in terms of all the criteria. We were just the third. So we didn't get as much of the funding to cover the construction, but we did get some engineering costs. So what we have to do in our tip, in the sheet that you are going to approve and the copies that I gave out to you, is we got to show those those dollar amounts, the federal dollar amounts that have been allocated to us. So that's the consistency part of it. We do, when this cycle of funding comes up, when the next grant application process comes up, we will continue to put in an application to try and acquire those construction funds as well in the future. We'll just have to keep putting in an application, and there's a good chance that it can get funded in the future based on the dollar amounts that are coming every year. You just have to keep at it, basically. Hello Street, it's an overlay project. These are a little not as expensive as a reconstruction project. So this one, the city applied for it a few years ago, and actually it fit into the dollar amount was something that they could handle within the grant money that's available every year. So this has been scheduled. However, it's been scheduled about 3-4 years out, but it is in their 6-year plan, and so we'll have to plan to try and make that work during that time period. So they've already approved it, it's just in a later year. The Waterfront Trail Improvements Project, this is the TAP application, the Transportation Alternative Program. This is a lesser, they don't have quite as money as the Surface Transportation Block Grant. And the original application was much larger. We applied for a grant that would cover improvements all along the waterfront trail. And of course, that was a $500,000 project. And they said, well, there's not that much money, but we'll give you $120,000. How's that? And so we were like, okay, we'll take that. And so we are going to try and apply that to the VFW park that had that a little trail erosion based on not natural erosion, but it was actually a vault that kind of broke through and took some of the mud away and made the sidewalk a little unstable. So we decided that we were going to use that money to try and fix that, because that's part of the scope of that overall project. And so we've applied for that this year as well, and it has gone through the technical advisory board and the policy board and was approved. So we're going to use a lot of that grant money to improve the VFW improvements. So I have the revised sheets. I emailed it to you guys earlier, and I also have some hard copies in front of you. I know the screen doesn't show the numbers really well, but what I really want to point out is, I mean, most of the numbers that are reflected on the left side of the sheet there is the dollar amounts that we have been granted based on the money that's available in the grant. And so you have some years in which the IRTPO said, okay, we have money in 2023 or 2024, so therefore you can spend it. Now the real challenge, or the real thing that would allow us to access this dollar amount, is the 13.5% match. Now you see those local funds on the right side. That is the dollar amount that we have to make sure that we put into our capital improvements plan and our budgeting process. That's the way that we can kind of make sure that when that year comes, we have the money to use the federal grant dollars. So when we come back, which I'll be coming back to you again in a month or two to present the capital improvements plan, and I'll have those numbers under those years, hopefully, to try and do them. And of course, that has to compete with all other city projects that we have planned for, and we have to make sure that our bottom line adds up. And if it doesn't, then we have to make a decision to move things around. If we move our money around, then it impacts this as well. And so the next year, when we come back to the tip, we'll be basing a lot of the schedule changes based on what City Council decides on the CIP and the budget. So these are all connected, and they don't all happen at the same time. They do happen, a few months from each other. So there's always some constant tweaking that we have to do to line up. But the main thing is we try to schedule the dollars so that we can take advantage of the federal money. This is something that dollar amounts, the federal dollars, once it's granted, it doesn't come to our coffers and it doesn't sit in accrue interest, which would be nice if that were the case. But this is money that they hold on to, and when it comes to that particular year, we spend the money and we have to give them the paperwork, and they will then reimburse us for all the costs. So our paperwork and everything needs to be done right. Federal money, there's a lot of process that we have to go through to make sure that all of that paperwork is correctly done. So that's what we're trying to align ourselves. And this process is to just document the money that we have, our local funds for those years, and then we'll submit this sheet once you approve it, and then the IRTPO will submit their transportation improvement program, and we want all of that to be consistent as it goes to the state, which then will make the process a little more seamless when we get ready to actually access these dollars. So that, in a nutshell, is the transportation improvement program that's in front of you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. We, of course, this is one of those processes that does require a public hearing and an approval. The Planning Commission did hold a hearing on it, and they have made a recommendation to the City Council for approval. Now it's the City Council's turn to hold a public hearing and approve the TIP. So I recommend holding the public hearing, and then I'll come back for any questions that you have.
Okay. We'll open it up for public hearing at this time. Seeing none. Okay. Anything, council? Questions? Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify something here. On the first one, the 7th Avenue reconstruction, local funds, the match, is that $98,361. And where does that money come from?
Well, when we go through this capital improvement process, we'll identify the funding source for that. So we don't have to identify in the TIP right now where we're going to get that money, but when we do our capital improvements plan, we have to put this project as an expenditure for the years 2020, 22, and 23, and under that we'll have the local funds, and it can come from REIT funds, it can come from arterial fund, it can come from general fund, it can come from any funding source, but that's a decision we have to make.
Okay, you answered that question, because as we go then through Heller, there's 42,000 that's matching, and 140 on the waterfront trail enhancement for the VFW park. Am I understanding that correctly? Local, yeah. We have to come up with 140, 471.
Well, the bottom table on that sheet 3 is the total for all of them.
The total, okay.
Yeah.
Total local funds there.
Yeah.
And then the ones for the waterfront trail, there is no match on that.
There's no match.
That's why we don't have it down.
It's just the total amount.
I just wanted that clarification.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Kamek, so with the years, we only have to come up with that amount during that year when we would be able to use the funds.
Correct.
So we don't need that total all at once in our budget. We can divvy it out as we go through, because it says 2020, 2022, and 2023.
Yes,
So
I'm hoping that in the...
we can space it out.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the plan.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilor Larson.
I move to approve Resolution 18, Tax 17, and adopt a 6-year transportation improvement program, 2019 through years 2024.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the recommended action, just as it's written there, so I won't read it again. Motion by Councilor Larson, second by Mayor Pro Tem. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously.
We have one no vote.
Yes, she has exited the building.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
A non-vote, not a no vote.
Yeah, that's not a no vote. Okay, we are moving to our last item, all the way down to number 10, reports and discussions, most accident-prone intersections, presented by our police chief, Dresker.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Happy to say I'm not here to seek approval for a resolution or money tonight. So I just want to make sure that extra part is in there. I also had some comments, real brief ones that I was going to make on National Night Out, but since I'm not here for that, I'll not do that unless somebody asks me to at the end of this. So getting right to the point, I wasn't here when this request was made. The request was to look at the highest number of accidents and try to figure out what locations we have as the highest accident rates. So what we did, and I've got a PowerPoint here. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We did a 5-year study period to just keep it to a 5-year period. And my staff, who did a great job helping me out, and along with ICOM, this map shows you, and I think you've got the charts there with the intersections listed there. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So if you've got the numbers here, and of course you guys are very familiar with the intersections themselves, but what we did is the top 5, and you can look there and see the locations, and we've broken down the number figures, ranking them, and then we've also got one there that you see as H. While not truly an intersection, this is that intersection that some people refer to there as the Hagen exit there, exiting. And while the intent of why the data was being sought wasn't, at least to me, I didn't find something dictating that. I think I know part of the reason, so we did include that, and we're looking at pedestrian safety kind of thing and that kind of stuff. So as you look at that, our number 1 location for accidents over this 5-year period of time was Pioneer Way in Erie. Number 2 was the 20 Swantown intersection. Number 3 was 20 in Barrington. Number 4 was 20 in Goldie. And number 5 was 20 in Whidbey. And then, of course, down below, you've got that intersection there with that shopping market or that location there. It's pretty consistent with a lot of what you'd see. Obviously, with Washington State 20, Highway 20 there, very highly used. The speeds are a little higher than in other areas. They're very busy intersections. And we broke it down for the different years. Just a quick comment on the entrance there for that shopping center. I do know through talking with people that at least at this point in time there is money dedicated by the property owner to redo that intersection out of concern of pedestrian safety and the way it's currently constructed. So I think they tried to do it this year. The money wasn't there. They budgeted it so far for next year. Of course, that's not driven by us. That's just purely a property owner's decision. And I just was in some communications where that information was relayed to me, just for council's information. There's some other slides up there. I think I'll just briefly go through those and answer any questions. All we did is break down some more information. Really, that's kind of interesting part is the hours. You'll see, of course, that most of the accidents through each of these slides, each slide contains an intersection. You'll see that most of the hours are 7 o'clock to 5 p.m. Again, that's consistent with peak traffic periods. And then the next most frequent is 5 p.m. to midnight, with some intersections having none and most having very few, the midnight to 7 a.m. It also breaks down injuries reported, which is, again, consistent with the accidents. And then we threw some valuable staff pictures in there at the end, which is consistent with the number of accidents. And then we've also thrown in some citation data, which is a little hard to interpret and read and varies based on stuff, but we did throw that in there. So that gives you the top 5 over the 5 years, and then the other one's thrown in there. So I'm open to any questions.
Yes, questions. Anybody? I know Councilor Servadius had asked for this, and we were...
He's here in spirit.
We were debating whether to put it off or not, and decided we were under a time frame to do it tonight, so he'll need to watch this to catch up. Maybe he already has. If he has, hi out there, Joel.
And I might throw in just real quick, the data is pulled from a system we call Spillman. So this is data pulled from entries made by ICOM and entries, additional data input by officers, and it's over the period of time, and it's based on that statistical data, and that's where it comes from.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I believe the Barrington and Barlow is that, as council members, we have gotten comments about panhandlers or whatever limiting sight, depending on which way you're coming in or out, and depending on how many are grouped in an area or not. And if we needed to make an adjustment in some of our codes or something like that was the reason for that question, if I'm not mistaken, to be sure everyone is safe and not infringing on others. But this is interesting.
And just a comment on that, so this is purely statistical data
Right.
on collisions that occurred. It does not track close calls, it does not track perceptions, it does not track visibility obstructions that don't lead to an accident, but it is one indicator of problem locations. It's not the only indicator, and there may be other issues. I know there's concern about that one location. I know the property owners at least see some kind of an issue there, from what I've been told, so that's part of the reason why there's plans to do something different.
Okay, yes, Councilor Larson.
Chief Jessica, my question is this. Do you have any thoughts or comments about last night's National Night Out?
Well, yes, I do. Thank you for asking that. Unfortunately, when I got up on that stage and I was like the last one in line, I was like, geez, the mayor already took everything, and it's like, I'm looking out, by that time, nobody's standing around anymore. They're all gone. So I did want to make sure I thank the Lions Club who did it, who was very valuable in the partnership and have been in the past. And I wanted to mention that this year there was a brief period of time where there's a hiccup where it was almost looking like there might be a real reduction in what was going to happen or some problems with that. And Lisa Felix and Steve Powers, two city employees, stepped up with some of my staff to work towards trying to resolve that, and with the Lions Club. And then I wanted to give kudos to the mayor who, it's blasé, but I'm going to say it anyways, with a stroke of a pen, made it happen. So, we worked through some issues and said, these issues are worth working through or getting past to make this happen the way that it should happen. And I come from a community that did National Night Out like a lot of communities do. And I can tell you Oak Harbor is just a step above that. And part of that is the vendors, and part of that is all the other stuff, and all the collaborators from the Navy to the Coast Guard to everybody that comes in. So I think it's good. I think it's going to be better. I talked to one group there who said next year we want to bring our helicopter. So I think it's people are invested in it. And then I want to thank Jim Hoagland and Carl Syme, who put a lot of work into this year from our department, along with a lot of others. We had Lisa Edlin there. We had two captains there. John Valenzuela, I can go on, but those are some key members. And then, quickly, and then I'll be done, two more things. I want to thank council members who were able to come. And when council shows up for these type of events, and I'm not talking about just from a police perspective, although we appreciate seeing that support, but even these events, the community, I think, notes that, and we as staff members note that too. And I know there's some that can't come, and that's the way it is. But sometimes you have a group here, a group there, but it is important, and we appreciate the support that you guys show on that, and of course the mayor was there. And then lastly, the community who showed up, because it truly is about connecting with the community, trying to show them what we do, what we have, make that connection. We're their neighbors, and so we had a lot of people show up. I don't know the numbers, but I think it was bigger than last year, and so we very much appreciate the community that shows up and supports that, and a lot of comments from them. So that's it. That's my brief comments. Thank you for asking that question.
Great. Any other council business?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's adjourned.